Tiki Man of the Viking had the opportunity to be on a panel with the late writer Andrew E. Kaufman back in 2024 at the OWFI Writers Conference. It was all about murder and mayhem and was actually quite enjoyable. I discovered from Andrew that it was his first time to travel in his wheelchair once he was fighting his debilitating illness. We didn't really discuss that all that much. We just talked about writing. We offer this rebroadcast of our interview with him at that conference as a tribute to a conscientious writer and a man who just never gave up.
In this episode for OWFI, we interview Andrew E. Kaufman, a broadcast journalist turned best-selling author. After receiving his degrees in journalism and political science from San Diego State University, he started his writing career as an Emmy-nominated writer and producer at a CBS affiliate in San Diego, and then in Los Angeles. For more than 10 years, he produced special series and covered many nationally known cases, including the O.J. Simpson trial. His latest novel, Son of the Sea, is a departure from his past works and debuted at #1 in new releases in contemporary literature and fiction. Andrew is also a contributor to the Chicken Soup for the Soul books, where he wrote about his two-time battle against cancer and early struggle to become a best-selling author. Tiki Man and the Viking present Andrew E. Kaufman.
And in a recent event that we just were at, you were telling me an interesting anecdote about writing that. Could you share that with us?
Which thing were we talking about? Just
The double...
So Twisted was an interesting kind of a story because it had two plot lines, and one line was invisible, and the other one was the physical plot line. And you don't know that invisible plot line is running through the story until the very end, when they kind of merge together into one, and then you're like, wow, this has been happening all this time.
What's involved with doing two plot lines of that nature? Did you have to plot it out, track it out?
I really had to keep track of both stories, and it was important to outline in this. And before that, I had not been an outliner; I had been a pantser. But this novel really changed that because I had to keep track of the invisible line. I had to make sure the invisible plot line wasn't conflicting with the visible one,
right?
And I also had to make sure that it wasn't giving away the invisible plot line in the physical one. So there was so much to keep track of to keep this balance going throughout the book, so people didn't figure out the ending. And
also make sure that they also blended at the end as well.
Blended. In other words, it had to make sense. It had to come together and go, oh wow, of course, instead of, huh?
Right.
So it was a matter of really keeping a very strict outline and referring to those outlines to make sure, okay, this is here, this is here. Does this give this away? Did I say too much here? Did I add something, was something in the dialogue a giveaway? So it was really important to keep a very a strict outline timeline of every event to keep things going in a sense that it all made sense in the end. And that it was kind of like what I wanted people to feel like the rug was pulled out from under them.
Yes, yeah.
And a lot of people are like, the responses were, oh my God, I have to go back and read this book a second time so I can see all the clues because they're all there.
And that was the invisible plot line.
Yeah, I had created clues, but I couldn't give away too many clues.
Right.
So it was a delicate balance of I had to instill clues all along. So when they looked back, they were like, "Oh yeah,
makes sense.
That was happening. That makes sense. That was one of the books that more people than my others said, I got to go back and read it again now that I know the storyline because I want to see all the subtle clues because it was all in the dialogue. There were things that were said that were hints.
That's even tougher.
So you can see why an outline was so important because it's so necessary to create this very delicate, fragile world that couldn't be out in the open.
Yeah.
So that did that change your style from pantser to more of a plotter?
Yes. After that, I realized how important it is to outline, and I was the one who was like, I'll never outline. I'm always going to be a pantser. It ruins my creativity. But I discovered that when my next book came, What She Doesn't Know, I did the same thing. And my last novel, I did that. Because while outlining is extremely boring, because it's a compressed story. It's not that you don't get to write your pretty words.
Right.
It's compressed. It's very basic. It looks boring on paper. Outlines look very boring. What I realized was once I had all that in place, I wrote the book, and it went so much faster.
Wow.
Because I had everything in place. I knew what I was doing. It was like when I was pantsing, I spent a lot of time staring at walls and not writing. Trying to think, like, where am I going to go next?
Yeah.
What do I do with this now? Shoot. How am I going to go? When I was writing, it's like, oh, I already have that. And I just would start writing. And then I got to expand the story and just kind of let it expand, like adding water kind of a thing, where it was just, it was a lot easier. And while the process of outlining is really boring and takes a lot of time, and it's just not fun, the good part is I wrote my last book, my first draft, in the shortest time I've ever written a first draft. Because it was all, and not only did that, I did a character analysis. So before I ever started the book, I knew who my characters were. I knew everything about them. I knew about their childhoods. I wrote about events in their lives that had occurred, whether they were going to be on the page or not. They helped me. They were the scaffolding. So all the scaffolding was in place for this story.
You could build on it.
And I could build on it, and it was like so much easier just to go off that. So while people hate outlining, and I hate outlining, when it came to writing the story, it was just so much easier. I knew so much before I started.
Yeah, and you had everything. You didn't have to come up with it on the fly. You had everything prepped.
Everything, and then I added, like I was telling you earlier when we spoke, I added to that. Gems would come to me, and I would just fold those in, like, oh, here's another idea. But that wasn't good because the story was already solid in place.
Right.
Anything I added would just make it better.
And there are some plotters that they are rigid and they are inflexible, and this is how it's going to go. The fact that you plot, create the character background, gives you the freedom to go, this is a nugget that I want to put in. For me, this whole outlining thing, the food analogy is stir fry. You can't just whip together stir fry. You have to cut the vegetables and the meat and get the sauce ready. And then cooking takes no time at all.
Yeah,
but you have to prep.
I think a lot of people mistakes a lot of maybe newer writers make is they think a first draft has to be perfect.
Oh my God.
No.
And if you ever listen to Anne Lamont's or read Anne Lamont's book, Bird by Bird, she said first drafts are shit.
Yep.
Right.
And
Your first drafts are not readable.
They're not readable, and they shouldn't be. You just need to get the story down.
Right, exactly.
So for me, I got the story down, and it was a little more organized and a little more clear since I had the outline. But that didn't mean it was anywhere near perfect, because I do multiple drafts of my books, probably about 13 to 20 of my book, because I obsess. And every draft is another layer.
Right.
Yeah, people think I'm crazy.
Well,
I'm so sick of my books. By the time I finish them, I don't ever want to see them again.
I think most people think most writers are crazy, but
We
that's
are,
my opinion.
but I obsess over my books, but each draft is another layer that I add to it. So every draft for me is just another layer that I throw on there, and that's where the gems and the additions come on. But that basic story, that first draft, is all in place,
and
it's fertile.
We've talked to so many different writers, and every style is different. Yours is unique, and I think the most important thing that we want to express to any writer is find your style, find your method of craft, your process, because it works for you. Somebody will watch this and go, Andrew's style works for me. I might try that. And that's the thing we just want to encourage.
Sure.
Whatever you're doing as a writer, part of the process of developing is finding
your voice.
Your voice, your craft, your style.
And how to write a book.
So tell us about the most recent book that's come out, Some of the Sea, please.
Some of the Sea is a departure from anything I've ever written before. It is it's literary fiction. It's the kind of book I've always wanted to write. I've always written these kind of thriller, twisty, intense, psychological suspense, but I also have a side of me that likes to tap into the emotional. So this is a character-driven story more than a plot-driven story. This is about the characters, about their lives. It's a story of a father and son overcoming trauma. And it's really, I loved writing it because I do like to write emotional stories, and even my thrillers have emotional elements in them because I like to put those in there. So a lot of feels in this book, and I loved exploring that. Is exploring the emotional sides of the story and getting into the character's head in a different way than from thrillers. You know, the growing up, the coming of age, trauma, all that stuff those are beautiful stories. They can be beautiful stories.
And your process was still the same, the character development?
More character development.
More so, because it was character-based.
Because it was character-driven, and it's based on trauma and psychological aspects of growing up. I really had to get to know those characters on a much more intimate level. You know, in a thriller, there's not a lot of time to ruminate over characters' backgrounds, lives. You're moving at a much faster pace. Literary fiction, you get to slow down the pace. You get to turn the gears a little more slowly in there, and you get to go more in depth into things. You get to do more explaining. You know, I learned in thrillers is pacing. There's not time to stop to do anything. Everything has to keep moving because that's what the reader wants. This story, they have time to kind of sit back and go into the character's past a little bit and understand a little more. I really loved kind of expanding on my writing and expanding on an emotional level. So even more so character development, because I really had to understand the motivations of my characters because they're going through so much on an emotional level.
Does this represent a diversion from the psychological thrillers, or is this a new direction?
This is all my books are psychological. So I would call this psychological fiction and not a psychological thriller. In that the pacing is different. So a psychological thriller, more people who are disturbed and unbalanced, and more intensity and more speed and more things. This definitely deals with psychological issues, but it's a much more slower pace.
Right.
And I liked slowing things down a little bit. I enjoyed slowing the pace down, taking time to just, much more time to describe settings.
Okay.
In thrillers, you really can't sit and describe a setting for more than a little bit.
Right.
Before you lose the reader. With this, people are expecting that. They want to know what I relied on all the senses. It takes place in San Diego.
Okay.
And it takes along the beaches. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to really tap into what was he smelling? What did it smell like at the beach?
And the settings almost become characters themselves.
Exactly. And I always feel like my settings are characters in themselves because they take on their own personalities. I mean, I read a passage in my group here about how the setting was a character. There's a passage about he's on the beach and he's thinking about his life and he realizes, coming to a place that doesn't even know your name, but it's comfortable.
Wow.
That
kind of losing yourself.
Yeah. I mean, I could try to find it for you, but it was more like it's lonely going to a place that doesn't even know you exist. That you keep coming back, that kind of a thing. That's taking a setting. I couldn't do that in a thriller, but I could certainly do it in literature.
I don't think you could even write that kind of a line in a thriller. That
No,
kind of a line it resonates.
No, but that's what the difference is. I think in literary fiction is that you can take the time, and it's expected, and it's like, it's all about. You really have to describe every sense. Mm-hmm. He smelled the briny air, and it reminded him of his childhood. It's all those connections, those connections that keep happening in a literary fiction that don't necessarily happen in a thriller, because you have more time. This is the longest book I've written. It was 95,000 words.
Wow.
Whoa.
I've never written a book that long, but you can do that in literary fiction. In a thriller, you can't.
So what are you going to write next?
Yes.
I don't know. I'm running into health problems, so I don't know how much I'm going to write. I struggled to get through this one. So I wanted to make sure I finished this book. We'll see.
Well, I hope that the writing and the fertile mind stays.
My mind is always thinking.
Yeah,
Yes.
and that's the one thing. If you get that, at least you can talk about it, teach, and pass on information. And you may have gone through issues over the last 9 years since I saw you last.
Yeah.
But as I recall, vaguely from 9 years ago, your attitude, your enthusiasm, and your passion for the craft still is high, and that is appreciated.
I love writing. I love being around writers. I love everything about it. I love talking about writing.
So, therefore, the chances are that we will be reaching out to Mr. Kaufman here for one of our more extended Zoom interviews, as we've done with Eric Rattan and Alex Gordon in the forthcoming.
And your previous series was called what?
No series. previous
Or
novels.
Previous novels.
I have 5
Okay.
that I wrote. So there was Wild and Savage Slate, which is horror.
Uh-huh.
Then there was Darkness and Shadow. No, The Lion and the Lamb Hunted, which was a psychological thriller.
Okay.
Darkness and Shadows was the sequel to that book. So
Okay.
there's two books. Then What She Doesn't Know, and then this. Is that 6?
Twisted.
Twisted. Oh, Twisted was after The Lion and the Lamb Hunted.
Okay.
Then What She Doesn't Know. So,
And all those are available on...
yeah, they're all on Amazon.
Okay.
All there.
On Amazon. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Look
Great
forward-
talking to you.
And we're wrapping up the conference, so I think after our final session,
Yep.
then
We
there's
started it and we're finishing it.
Well, good luck to
Oh my
you
goodness! Thanks a lot. Appreciate you.
on your future podcast. And glad I got to talk to you and meet you guys.
Yeah.
I'll see you around.
We'll see y'all.
Take care.
Bye bye.
Tiki Man and the Viking Podcast brought to you by Rumination of Thunder Media. The following intro and outro music was used for this media project. The music Find Them by Alexander Nakrata. Free download from filmmusic.io. License Creative Commons Attribution 4.0 International.